Pam Palmater is with me this morning, who's the chair in Indigenous governance at Ryerson University. She is Mi'kmaq herself, a member of the Eel River Bar First Nation in northern New Brunswick. This morning she is in Toronto, and it's wonderful to see you. Thank you for giving us some time today.
Thanks for having me.
Can I begin with your overall reaction to the numbers broadly, but I'm sure you want to hone in specifically on what Mark was mentioning, Professor Palmater, in terms of the overrepresentation of Blacks and Indigenous people in this database?
Well, I mean, first of all, I'm not surprised. We know that police disproportionately brutalize, over-incarcerate, profile, card, and kill Indigenous peoples. But what is really alarming is the significant increase in the last period of time that was under the CBC study. I mean, that's really alarming. You would think that over time, people would learn from their, so-called cultural awareness training and safety training and, discipline. But in fact, that's not the case. And the fact that it's happening at a time when we're in protests about police brutality and police racism is also very concerning. It really highlights the fact that they have such a high degree of impunity for incidents that result in our deaths.
So just to underscore that point, as Mark was unearthing, the average of the past 10 years is an average of 30 people killed a year in encounters with police. But this year already, halfway through, 30 people have been killed already. Why do you think that number is increasing and is as high as it is?
Well, I think there's a lot of tension right now, but I also think that there's a lot of pushback from police forces, both in Canada and the United States. They have been pretty much sheltered by their high levels of impunity in terms of the legislation that protects their salaries when they're accused, from these alleged oversight bodies that rarely ever find wrongdoing by police officers, and the fact that those who actually do the reviewing on oversight committees are statistically white male police officers or former white male police officers. So there's a real sense of protection in what it is that they're doing. But the problem is what they're doing is they're creating death penalties for being Black and Indigenous, death penalties for being impoverished, and making mental health a crime when none of those things should be policed.
I want to talk about solutions with you in just a second, but the fact that this data is now available, I mentioned a couple of times because it may be surprising to some that this is not, these are not figures, this is not data that has been available to the public, and so CBC is compiling this now. Having access to the data, having access to these numbers and seeing what has happened going back some 20 years now, what impact will that have?
Well, it's huge. I mean, thank goodness for CBC gathering these statistics, because without them, we are not able to access that information from any of the police forces. We're not able to access any of the internal disciplinary files, records, any of the oversight files. And that's a real problem. We should be able to go to Statistics Canada and say, hey, what's happening across all of these fields? And here's another really important point. All of the United Nations human rights treaty bodies have told Canada that the only way to monitor human rights protections and abuses is by collecting race and sex-based data that's in a disaggregated form. And they've been telling Canada they need to do that. And we've been telling Canada the same thing. And they haven't been doing it. And so it's critical that we start compiling these databases.
And so with this database now as a tool, what solutions does it point to, do you think?
Well, it's really important because it gives us the evidence we need to say over and over and over again, hey, we have a problem and we need to fix this problem. And whatever it is that you're doing now that you think fixes the problem, cultural awareness training, internal discipline, it's not working. So we need to look outside of that. And that's why you see people calling for things like defunding the police, demilitarizing the police, disarming the police, because all of the traditional processes to address police brutalization and racism isn't working.
One of the things that we heard of the other day, there was a lot of reporting about how the Anishinaabe Police Service, which you may be familiar with, the background, there was some reporting on in its 26 years. It's the largest Indigenous police force in the country, and it has never shot and killed anyone, and no officer has died in the line of duty. Where do Indigenous police forces themselves, where do they fit in as a potential solution in your view?
Well, it varies across the country, as you know, because First Nations in each region have their own processes. In some of the Gayankahaga or Mohawk communities, they have peacekeepers, so less like police officers and more like keeping the peace and keeping safe in communities. Others have traditional forms of warriors that are protectors. And others just want supports. They don't actually want policing of their communities, but they would like to have health supports and safety supports and shelters and things like that. So it really varies across the country, but I think it's very telling when you do have a police force that very much mirrors the police forces across the country, and they don't go around shooting their own people. So why is it that primarily white male police officers are going around shooting Black and Indigenous peoples?
Thank you for the time this morning. I always appreciate your perspective. We certainly do like to hear. Pam Palmater,
Thanks.
thank you.